conversation. It's the conversation. Y'all ready? Let's go. No filter, no restrictions. You about to get my opinion in its purest form. So my words, don't try to spin them. What I said is what I said. And what I said, I meant it. The gloves are off now when I'm coming out swinging. So engage in verbal combat, but you better be ready. Cause this here for me is light work, even if the topic's heavy. I'm ready for it all with no running from nothing. You just take the time to digest what I put in. No rushing, but time is moving, don't waste it. You want the real, come and face it. Come sit and talk to me if you want it straight without a chaser. And it might burn a little when you step on up to taste it. But it's nothing harsh, I promise. Just a little conversation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the conversation. Dave, can you hear us?
I can hear you, and I could hear the intro that's way cooler than I am.
I told you it was the intro, Harold. I said that because Harold kept trying to talk to you, and he's like, "Can Dave not hear me? He's just staring at the screen." I said, "I think he hears the intro."
There was nothing. It wasn't. Maybe I need to click this button to listen to off-screen feeds. But no, I was just jamming it. You know, I've been in Maine like forever now, and fourth whitest state in the nation, and
wow.
It's
Need a little pepper, huh? Need a little seasoning. Sounds like, I don't know.
It's now in fairness, I gravitate to Hollowell, which is kind of like very progressive, and still white, but it's very white. Anyway, so here I am back, and woohoo.
That is, I mean, wait. You said what number of the whitest state in America?
I believe it was fourth whitest.
Well, what's number 3, 2, and 1? Now I'm curious.
One
about
is
the
West Virginia at like 97%. And I don't know, I'm going off of a TikTok thing that I saw. And so but no, I think it's like 94%. It's it's a state that just never had an African American population in it. Hell, it didn't have much of any population, and it's not a very populated state. And so it never, and there was not a movement towards any kind of urban migration in World War II. In fact, in a lot of ways, the jobs in Maine were textile jobs. And what do we have down here in North Carolina? A lot of textile factories. The jobs actually came here rather than people going there. So, but we digress.
Is it digress or digress?
I believe you can say it either way. I think if you look up the thing, it'll be English is a malleable language.
Love it.
All right. So as usual, Dave, one of the things we love to do with you is we like to talk a little bit about Ukraine anytime we can, because just like with any war that's going on, everyone's extremely invested in the first year. And then when you get into year 2, the people who are heavily invested stay. People start to die off, and they just check in for updates to see what's going on. And I feel like that's where we are with a lot of people, especially with what's going on in with Israel and Hamas right now. Ukraine's kind of taken, a back step, not a back step, but they're on the back page.
Right. And honestly, actually, I have adopted that strategy. There is the Rip Van Winkle strategy or technique of, they often say this with investing, right? That you should set up your investments and then Rip Van Winkle it, go away for 20 years and come back and see how things work. With Ukraine, we have not seen a lot of movement, and in a discernible way on a day-to-day basis, a lot of action is going on. And in a nutshell, the Ukrainians have not really penetrated. We had a lot of anticipation for the ground offensive. The Ukrainians attacked the Russian line of fortifications and in June, and it just really they made a small dent in it. They have pierced through things, but they're not able. They haven't broken out, and so what they found was that it was basically the landmines that the Russians had, just seriously, like in like and a stupid amount of landmines were in their way, and it just taken them a long time to work through. I would say that while that's going on, there's been a lot of fighting around the front. We've seen the Ukrainians roll back, make some marginal gains around Bakhmut, and we've seen various other places in like Donetsk, Zaporizhia border where the Ukrainians have made marginal gains, and they've managed to keep fighting up across the front, right? And I think the bigger story, from my point of view, is that sure the Ukrainians, there was this idea that we're going to go old school, right? Break through the line, get to Melitopol, then get to the Sea of Azov. Cut the land bridge. That was kind of the idea, right? And that has a kind of 20th century feel to it, right? The armored columns taking land didn't work out, right? That just didn't work out because of the just insane number. I mean, seriously, insane number of landmines and fortifications Russians put out. But the Ukrainians have nevertheless continued to innovate. They've gotten better weapons. They've got longer range weapons, and they have really, if the idea was to get to the Sea of Azov to make it hard to occupy Crimea, the Ukrainians have been, doing that. They've been making it hard to occupy Crimea all along. They have now been able, through the use of long-range weapons, various drones, just a whole bunch of, special forces attacks. They've done a lot of things to make it very difficult for Russia in Crimea. They have basically chased the Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol, and so they've been kind of working on more of a in some ways it's a more 21st century solution. Like, no, okay, we aren't going to get through all these layers of defense anytime soon. That doesn't mean we have to give up on the strategic goal of making Crimea really hard for you to hold, and they've, I think, been doing a good job there. Meanwhile, most recently, Russia has been attacking Avdiivka. For some reason, Russia got it in its head that they need to take Avdiivka. What's Avdiivka? It's a small town by Donetsk City, because there's Donetsk province and then the capital is Donetsk City. And there's this one town that, since the day the war started, Russia has not advanced like a foot beyond the original border. This town is right there on the original border where the breakaway republic in Ukraine, the rest of Ukraine is, and they have, famously not taken a foot of it, right? And so the Russians have been just like, pushing troops in and losing armored vehicles by the hundreds and people by the thousands. And so they've really been going in there recently to no discernible effect. And of course, most of the summer was taken up with Russian shenanigans, right? Um, coups and killing Yevgeny Prigozhin, and all that other crap has been going on. But I think that where we are right now is the Ukrainians are continuing to make these incremental moves, but I think they've just kind of adopted more of uh, a operational interdiction, making it hard to stay in Crimea. They are continuing to threaten across the lines. Recently, they actually had about a battalion-sized raid or assault across the Dnipro River into the flanks of Russia, kind of just like, no place is safe, guys. And so that's where we are right now. They're working on them and just continuing to wear Russia down. So that's, I think, a big thing. That's where I see it right now.
Dave, always love a good update about what's going on in that neck of the woods. But that brings me, before we get into Israel and Hamas, someone left a comment a long time ago on one of our Ukraine updates that I didn't get to because it was only me and you, and I didn't want to answer. Not because I'm not black. I'd like to have Harold on here when we talk about all things, not involving that involves people of color. So anytime something happens in especially Europe when it comes to wars, whether it's genocide, attacks, we get so much information, so much coverage. And a woman brought up a good example: the amount of genocides and war and countries at each other's necks or trying to be taken over from within in Africa are staggering, but we don't really talk about it.
And
Now,
then,
I'm not going to assume why we don't talk about it. I'd like to hear it from two of the smarter people that I know, starting with you, Harold.
well, the bottom line is when we hear about certain things, there is a vested interest, uh, basically by America or the power structure within America. I do recall, and I forget which country it occurred in, but when we lost that soldier, the black soldier that was from Miami, due to them being, I guess, some type of surprise attack where he lost his life. There were some questions about, what should have happened, what could have happened, why wasn't there enough reinforcement there? Was there a warning that was ignored, etc.? It had to, the only reason we heard about it was because there was loss of life from an American soldier. Yes, we know that there are many genocides, there are many atrocities that transpire in African nations. Some are self inflicted, some are also inflicted by other, i.e., colonists who have gone into those areas, other countries that have gone into those areas for their, again, their own vested interest. So when we do hear about something, trust me, I've learned that there has to be a vested interest from America, not so much that there's concern about the people and the human rights, violations that may be transpiring or the UN violations that may be occurring. It's all about what is in it for America to really either give some level of attention, exposure, and or support to those particular instances or incidents.
Dave?
Well, and you can listen to what Harold just said, and if you just take very literally what he said, there's this question of, well, if there isn't an American angle to it, why would it make the news, right? And I mean, sure, it's horrible and atrocities occur, but um, when you look at what people are going to be interested in, because a big thing about the news is, to a certain extent, there's governments that have a lot of influence over what gets reported and what doesn't. There are news organizations that filter things and that have certain biases, but then there's also the audience effect, right? And that's one that I think often doesn't get accounted for, is that crickets chirp, right? If the people in there aren't interested in it, they aren't going to do it. And so part of it, I think, is just to add everything Harold said. We're going to give that pride of place. To add another secondary point, I would just throw in that to a certain extent, people have to resonate. The story has to resonate with them, and in an audience, in order for a commercial news media to want to run the story. And so that's why you see, I think I always said about Ukraine, right? One of the things that guaranteed that in Europe, at least, this was, the images and everything was going to be really harsh for Putin, is the Ukrainians look like Europeans. And so the Europeans are going to be just like rapt attention to this as a news story. And that is, I think, when people don't look like you, or when you don't have a material dog in the fight, when there isn't, like I say, until an American soldier gets involved, or until an American hostage is taken, there is a lack, I think, quite naturally, if not whether that's morally right or not, I think there's naturally that lack of something. And so that's why I think we see these differences.
Okay, thank you. I hope she sees this video and understands both your explanations. Um, our next topic, and one of the things getting into this topic, we're not NBC, we're not ABC, we're not CNN, we don't have a million producers telling us what we can and can't say. But something before we get into actually what's happening, something that baffles a lot of people who don't get a clear, I want to say a clear answer to why this is. You can openly talk about a bunch of topics: black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Indian, Catholic, Protestant, Christian, Muslim, Hindu. But when you're talking Israel and Jewish things, everyone feels they have to tiptoe around and you can't say certain things because it's and I don't know how to explain educatingly to someone why that is. And a lot of people feel that way, but they don't know how to explain it without sounding, you know, like they're anti-Semitic. Or but why is that? Do you think you have some insight on when we're talking those particular topics, you have to toe the line so much?
Who's that addressed to?
That's just anybody who's willing to answer, because that's the only question where there was complete silence.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh no. Go ahead, Dave.
No, just kidding.
I mean, you have, first of all, in the United States, Israel is a very popular country, and over the years, it has evolved. The pro-Israeli stance has evolved from being a it's really become a very bipartisan, and it's evolved from being a Jewish issue, right, to being just there's an American commitment to Israel, and in polling the positives, right, the way American like voters feel, right, forget the leadership, is very strong, and that has developed over the years, and so you do have that, but you also have I think as a result, a backlash, like these Harvard kids who had a very pro-Palestinian uh, point of view, condemning Israel, and that really doesn't sit well with a lot of Americans. And so I think that this issue just it's very polarized. It's been polarized uh, for a long period of time. You know, back when I was a kid, you know, in college studying this stuff. This was as much an issue then, you know, and so I think that's the polarization levels on it are, I think, off the charts, especially in the United States.
And if I would add to that, I think part of the challenge that we have is really separating Israel, the government, from Jews or the Jewish people. Because sometimes when people say things, you hear certain tropes or certain things that do sound anti-Semitic if you're not careful. However, I've often asked the question, you know, has Israel ever done anything wrong? And I'm speaking of the government. I'm not speaking of the people because I know the government is not comprised of or all of the people. And you have a number of people who are from Israel, who are Jewish, that have spoken outwardly about and against their government, the Israeli government, and some of the things that they've done. But when you're on the outside looking in, you definitely have to, you know, speak carefully. And in America, there is a lot of influence by Israel, not just, you know, because of them having joint citizenship and being an ally of ours, but on many other areas as well, you know, because again, when we see what's going on in that section of the world, you know, we don't hear anything until something extreme or tragic happens. You know, when I've heard recently as a result of this particular attack that initiated by Hamas, you know, now you're starting to kind of roll the tape back. Okay, well, what was going on before this transpired? What may have potentially led up to this point? You know, and you hear different things, you start reading different things, and you start wondering. And then you got those that are closer to the fire that can give you more extreme or more detail, I'm sorry, uh, information as a part of what's going on in that section of the world. And so, yeah, it's difficult when you're on the outside looking in, not having all of the necessary information to describe, understand, or fully comprehend what's transpiring with Israel and the Palestinians. And because of one extremist group, which I'm still confused about certain elements of it, because Israel is a country. Is it just a state? Is it a but then what is Palestine, or what was Palestine? So I'm still kind of trying to figure all of that stuff out, because once you look at some of the maps that I've seen from 1917 versus 1946 versus 1947 versus 1980s, up until now, you're starting to see that when these skirmishes took place, more land was then, I guess you could say, taken away, annexed, or however you choose to describe it. And it's left a lot of people angered. It's left a lot of people feeling that they don't have any rights within that very region where they may have also grown up, been born, and that's all they know. So when you talk about this, I understand why it's necessary to walk on eggshells, but we have to tell the whole truth, regardless of who it hurts. And wrong is wrong, no matter how we cut it up. And so if there are certain things that transpired prior to that needed to be addressed, or should have been addressed, it should have been addressed long before now. And who knows, had it been addressed prior to, we may not have had that attack by Hamas and then other extremist groups, prior to the Hamas attacking innocent civilians. And then Israel's response, which again, many have said was also attacking innocent civilians. So again, we have a back and forth, we have retaliation, we have a lot of things that are going on. And it's a difficult conversation, but a necessary conversation if we're going to come to some level of understanding and prayerfully a level of peace. I'm done.
Two things, two things going on with that is, one, you still have people out there that don't understand the difference between Palestine and Hamas. And two, one of the things you talked about was telling the whole truth. I mean that's something we haven't done. This is a recent thing where we start telling about past things that have happened in this very country and start to
Agreed.
shed the light on and tell the whole story. So it's a new concept for us even. Dave, it looked like you were going to say something.
Well, no. One thing I was going to say is I'm impressed that Harold's dates that he mentioned offhandedly are just spot on, and so that tells me that Harold is above the 85, 90 percentile. I don't
Oh,
know where,
wow.
but I mean, to know that 1917 is when this shit starts, really. Uh, People don't know that, right? I mean,
Right.
they don't know that history. And they will then also they'll get into talking about, well, this happened in the 5th century, and they'll start reaching for other things that they're aware of, going into biblical, and there's whole bunches of misinformation on either Palestine, Israel wasn't a country, it was a country, and we get this bizarre scholarship, pseudo scholarship going on. And I think also the question of truth is the whole truth. I don't know. It is, both sides have built up narratives, and so the truth versus fact. I think there is both sides have kind of a constructed history, which, as one scholar, Katarina Kinval, talks about, people telling their stories of their identity, and that they have chosen glories and chosen traumas, and
Mm.
so they people construct a history that is never the whole truth, right? They have these certain things they pick, and both sides have that. And the King of Jordan said the problem with the dealing with Israel and Palestine is that both sides are convinced they're the victim, and it's so hard to move forward on that basis, because they both have their truths that they're the victim. And one other thing, when I was at the UN in 1984 studying there, we had a UN representative come in and talk about what was then the Arab-Israeli conflict, and he said, "Look, figuring out a solution to this. He's addressing a bunch of students. He said you could probably in one afternoon come up with a workable plan for peace in Israel. It's not hard, right? The issues are complex, but not so bizarre. And he said the problem would be just getting anyone to do it because they're so committed to to their differing views. And I always thought, that was 40 years ago, and it's one of these things. Like, yeah, that could still be true of the whole thing, and it's always just kind of worked around in my head. All right, so those are a few things I've thrown out.
And and for those who are confused on what's the difference between Palestine and Hamas,
Oh, that's a big one. Because you know
it's
what?
mhm,
That's the Palestinian flag. That ain't the Hamas flag.
correct.
Mm, mm.
The
You
Hamas,
caught it.
I saw like immediately. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Um, the Palestinian flag. Um, yeah, because the Hamas flag, by the way, their militant one that they tend to wave at protests
Yeah,
looks
I'm
very
not
much like
reckon.
the Saudi flag. It's a
Yeah,
green background with the Shahada, the testament of, I believe there's only one God and that Muhammad is and I won't paraphrase it too much, but it's the writing of their creed, and it's a starkly religious flag, which is right there the difference that Hamas is an Islamic movement, and Palestinians were by and large a secular people, and their state was, while most of them were Muslim, they also had a very significant Christian minority living there, and they were never really that religious, right? They were very, in a lot of ways, they were some of the most westernized people in the Middle East. And so Hamas represents that creeping religious component, right? The fundamentalism that came in. Oh, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? There you go. And that's, I think, the big difference that Hamas came in and brought religion into the mix. And that's where Iran is supporting them and egging them on, although they are Sunni, whereas Iran is Shia.
thank you. Well, the first I wasn't gonna recognize that flag, but after you've been talking, I'm like, yeah, I should probably put that one up.
So
Because
Tom will thank you for that.
yeah, because you can't base a country versus what an extremist group does. Correct. We wouldn't want anybody to judge America off of the KKK or off of a neo-Nazi platform group, within the country or any other
MAGA,
type of.
MAGA.
I think you might have COVID, Dave. You might need a shot. I don't
No,
know.
that's COVID's not real. Stop it. What on God's flat Earth are you talking about? There is no COVID conspiracy. I saw a Bill Burr special the other day where he talked about the guy going, COVID isn't real. It's made up. It's not true. And then when they finally get COVID, they go into a hospital and say, "Fix this."
Yeah.
You want me to fix the thing that didn't exist? Okay.
Yeah.
But your point was about not judging everyone by the
Yeah.
extremists in their society.
Correct. Do not judge everybody by the extremists of their society. And like Harold said, you got to understand the history of something. Nothing just happens. Nobody wakes up and just says, "Hey, I want to attack this place or this area just because." Uh, that's not a thing. Is there anything else you guys want to touch on this topic before we move on to the next one?
Well, I would just to wrap up my view,
Mhm.
kind of what my take on this thing is what's been going on. Um, Hamas came out swinging, right, and Hamas, with their attacks, massive barrages of rockets, bloody, violent, vicious attacks on kibbutz, on the music festival. One of the things, I've just seen, and then the taking of hostages and bringing them back, their attack this time feels different, right, than the kinds of things they've done before. Remember, Hamas came to the fore in the Intifada when they were throwing rocks, and that had been very successful because it put the Israel, we're only throwing rocks at you. You're going to shoot us, and of course the Israelis shoot, and
Anyway. Mm-hmm.
and then they inevitably they hit young people because like half the freaking population there is under 14, and so it puts them in battle. Very effective, and it kind of led to the Oslo Accords and apparently real progress for Palestine, for the Palestinian Authority. But Hamas kind of moved from there now, and so things go on. The Palestinian Authority has a civil war with Hamas, and Hamas goes its own way, getting more and more radicalized, developing technologies, developing weapons, digging tunnels. And then, a decade, they take over Gaza in 2007, right? And they seize control of Gaza from the Palestinian Authority, start ruling it. That's a long time. But now suddenly they've shot rockets, they've done things. Now they come out swinging, and it just seemed to me that their attack was calculated to provoke an over response, right? That they went big, they really went big into provoking Israel into a massive response. And my question has been, that seems in like, why, right? What's your end game? You guys planned this. This is not something that, like the Intifada, that in some ways had a grassroots beginning. This was a very calculated, prepared thing. And so what's the end game? Where do they see what's their story? Lawrence Friedman likes to say that strategies are stories told in the future tense, right? About how you will get there. And maybe they don't have a complete end game, but the idea is, because Friedman also says sometimes you just tell a story that will get you to a better place to act in the future, right? And so what's that story here? One is, massive response like we've seen, bombing of hospitals, and just the inevitable civilian carnage when you lob shells into a densely populated area where, once again, the 40, I've heard the number 48% of the population's under 14. You're going to hit civilians, right? And you're going to hit kids. And that's, by the way, the true evil is in being the guy who says, here's the plan, let's go kill innocent Israelis so that we provoke Israel to kill innocent Palestinians, as in our people. That's true evil. But then I'm kind of worried that it looks like Israel's going to do a ground attack, which they've never done. They've never gone into Gaza City. They've always, whenever they've had incursions there, or in the last few decades rather, they've stayed out of the more heavily populated areas. And I'm kind of worried that Hamas has calculated that they need to bring the IDF downtown, where they can engage in street fights using their local advantages of their preparations, their explosively formed penetrators that they got from Iran, the various other weapons they've probably been able to get, and their tunnel system, which gives them an advantage of moving around if they've been able to keep it secret from Israel. And I'm just really worried that is where they're going, and that Israel is just walking into that. And so that's my...
That's not going to be pretty.
No. And and the IDF, I don't know who they're planning on using. I hope they've got 300,000 reservists. I hope that's just a fixing force. I hope they've got more elite troops that will be, the guys that go downtown. But it's also something that, going into an urban area, just think of the preparation the United States did to go into Fallujah. Um, it was months and months of preparing for that. And the Israelis are kind of in a come as you are situation. And so I worry that may be the desire of Hamas, is to try to get them into a stand up fight on conditions that would be favorable to Hamas. Uh, so,
How do you?
yeah,
Oh, go ahead. Go
no,
ahead,
no.
Harold.
And if I would add, and I'll be as brief as I can, is essentially from me, and even issuing a public statement through the branch of the NACP. Basically, I stated that we stand for humanity, because at the end of the day, no matter what happens, inhumanity or inhumane, I guess you could say, situations have occurred, in this situation, whether it's the initial, attack or the initial response. And so my hope and my prayer is at the end of the day that the not so much cooler minds will prevail, but hearts affixed towards making sure that innocent people aren't part of the continued carnage that we see and hear about. I've heard that there's been more bombing in the last 10 days than we've done a year in other parts, in other skirmishes that we've been involved in as America. So, again, but you just hope that, the children, the women, the elderly, won't be further victimized through this already tragic set of circumstances as we move forward. And I will end there.
I don't think this is well. We thought the Ukraine conflict was not going to last this long when it initially started, right, Dave? You agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I mean, that was what the expert opinion was at 48 hours to Kyiv.
So I don't pretend or try to estimate how long a conflict will last. Um, Both of these conflicts that are going on seem like they're going to last through the next presidential election, which makes it very critical on who's elected president. We're going to talk about Dave's former best friend. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know why I always do that to you. But if you're keeping up with what's going on with Donald Trump, all the trials, his running for presidency, the amount of people who have been found guilty already, what in the world has to happen for him not to be able to run for president again?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I place in vanishingly small probability on Donald Trump becoming president again.
Mhm.
However, being the nominee for the Republican Party, that's a tough one, because they seem to have a whole bunch of people who are chugging the Kool-Aid, and there have been reports that that various projects, people who are trying to do outreach to Republican never Trumpers in the Republican Party are trying, have done focus groups with Trump supporters to see what they can say that will change their mind, right? And they bring out positions. They say, what if Trump said this? What if Trump did that? They bring out things where he said really stupid stuff, and they have thrown everything they can think of at the focus groups. And the reports are that their findings are that the Trumpers don't change, right? That through this very sophisticated focus group technology, they found out that, yeah, he could really shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. Wouldn't, the Trump supporters would say, oh, that guy, he probably saved someone's life by doing that. He probably, and that I'm embellishing there. But so that group is still there. But meanwhile, Republicans are, I mean, Trump is very likely to be in jail. right? That's my reading of a lot of this. That he is uh, going to have a couple trials for sure. Not sure whether the Mar-a-Lago document case will go because Judge Cannon seems to be moving in a way that might allow that to be delayed. But the others, the other two, the Georgia and uh, the January 6th trial in D.C. seem to be heading. And we just heard Mark Meadows flip. I mean, these people are flipping. Sidney Powell, Mark Cheesebro. Now Mark Meadows, his chief of staff. That's his. Number one person. Just we now know he flipped. So it's hard to see how he's not in jail at that point. However, the Republicans are putting these pledges out. Even if someone's convicted of a felony, they've got to be okay. There's also the 14th Amendment disqualification that could, in fact, have him out. But at the same time, Republicans are circling the drain. I mean, they are utterly, they're not able to pick a speaker. They had a guy they might have been able to pick, Emmer, and he's announced in the morning that he's the nominee, and by the afternoon he's determined he can't get enough support and he's withdrawn. Now we got this guy Johnson, right, who is an election denier, right? So we've gone from someone who was willing to at least, was not an election denier and thus might have garnered some support from moderates and maybe possibly even eventually some Democrats. But no, he's got to go. I mean, this, we are circling the drain on that side. And so that really kind of goes to the Republican, a serious meltdown here on that. And so I don't know, they're going to play out the primary. Sure, unless Trump gets disqualified, he could be the leader. But this is a party that is just, just look at what the Fox News hosts are saying about them, right? They are becoming increasingly critical of the party and turning their ire on themselves. So the Republican Civil War is well underway, and I just don't see that producing a win for them.
I don't see the Democratic Party taking as much the best advantage of what's going on as possible. Now, Harold, you might see that differently, but I'll let you go ahead and comment on what Dave just said and kind of what I just said too.
Well, I mean, essentially what we're seeing now is really a circus, and this is what happens when you allow extremists to garner this much control. And so they allowed it when it benefited them in 2016. And now they're seeing that in 2020, that extremism has hurt them. And this the Republican Party now that I'm speaking of. And, what's disturbing of me, and even when I look at Trump voters, and I've engaged many on TikTok lives, I've been in, chats where, we're having conversation. And when you bring forth facts about what's happened or what's going on, you start getting those what about comments. Are we speaking about facts, or are you now trying to say without any facts, other people are doing it all of a sudden? So let's forgive Trump. Forget about Trump. We don't want you to look at that. Let's go look over here at something else. And because of their refusal to embrace the fact that, there are certain crimes that were committed. You can't tell me someone with 91 indictments all of a sudden is going to go scot-free. He didn't do anything wrong. And rather than admit, and this is not just a challenge just for Republicans, it's just a human nature issue. It's hard for us humans to admit when we're wrong and when we've made a mistake or we made a poor choice. It makes it very difficult for us to embrace that. And in this particular case, dealing with this whole issue of the Republican Party, we see it right in front of our eyes. And I think the part that's not being spoken of, I'm concerned about, is 2025. and what the Heritage Foundation, the I think Federalist Society, and several other groups. If you go to Project 2025 website, you'll see all of these other conservative groups that have an agenda of what they're going to do when or if a conservative wins the election in 2024. And we're really moving towards an apartheid state. Not to go off on a tangent, I'll get back to where we are. As with respect to the Democrat Party, my concern is messaging has always been a problem. You've been given a whole lot during the 4-year Trump administration that you could have campaigned on to gain an advantage, and you took advantage of zero, none of it. And so, I feel that there's certain people that are conflicted at the top of the Democrat Party that didn't want to see the change that, many that elected, i.e., whether it's Biden or whomever, into office, even when Obama was in office. There are many at the top of the ticket that didn't want to see certain things changed. And that's why they allowed, i.e., Citizens United to pass so that you can get all of these dollars, whether they're dark money or on the surface money, being circulated through our political system. The fact that if you look at the trillions of dollars that are moving around just to influence 546 people, it's crazy. It's literally crazy. So are we really trying to do what's in the best interest of our country? Are we trying to shield and try to hide the criminality? Or are we just downright nonchalant and don't care about what's really going to happen, what potentially could happen, so that we could try to move this, as General Milley described this idea of America forward?
Thank you for that, Harold. Can you guys hear me? It looked like my
Yeah.
sound went out. Okay, you guys can hear me. I want to ask you this question before we wrap up. How do you feel about the response from the American government on right now as it stands to this date on the Ukraine Russia situation? And how do you feel about the response when it comes to Israel and the Hamas situation?
Well, I'll take a stab, and then I guess let Dave wrap it up, since he's probably the field expert in this. When I look at
Hold on, he always laughs.
I laugh
he's
when
the
people
resident
call me.
expert.
It's
I'm
funny.
just spouting.
I'm
I'm
just,
spouting like a water sprinkler here. That's what I'm doing.
no, I'm
But
laughing at anyone saying I'm an expert at anything, but okay.
He says he's not an
but
expert, Harold, but he leads with a story of when I was at the UN in
hey,
1802.
listen, I'm dreaming about going to the UN building, but that's a whole nother story. But no, when I look at the response to Ukraine and Russia's situation, first of all, I'm glad we don't have troops on the ground. That's number one, because I don't want to have our troops endangered and fighting someone else's skirmish. However, I've also had in other conversations, I speak about, much of what we donated initially were weapons that would eventually had to be, I guess you would say, recycled or circulated out of our warehouses, and allowed them the opportunity to use those things. So it didn't cost us anything. Matter of fact, it may have saved us money, because it would have cost us something to, whether it's we're blowing up munitions or taking them apart and putting in new components, etc. Whatever the case, however that process works. As it relates to Israel and Palestine, I think we've taken a stronger stance on one side, and not had a much more balanced approach to that particular situation. Because again, Hamas is the elected, I think 2006 elected government or leaders for the Palestinians, which again, I'm still confused about that whole process, because they're elected over the Palestinians, but they don't vote in the Israeli election, and all of them live in Israel. So maybe Dave can kind of give me some insight when he does his approach to help me understand. But
Well, he is
I
the
think
expert.
our approach, I think our approach with Israel and Palestine is much more biased than it is with Russia and Ukraine. simply because of our relationship with Israel and not so much our relationship with the Palestinian people, which I think if we're really friends of Israel, I just believe friends should be able to tell each other when they're doing something wrong. And in this particular case, I've always questioned, like at the very beginning, I've always asked the question, has Israel ever done anything wrong? And I think if we're truly friends and allies of Israel, we'll try to help them understand, even though it'd be hard for us, considering we haven't repented for our own sins, but help them understand that humanity is necessary so that peace can prevail. And I will stop there and allow the expert to come in and
All right, I'm
check
gonna
me.
stop teasing him with that.
Well, first of all, the question of Hamas. In in 2006, Hamas won when they had the Palestinian Authority was set up. Uh, Hamas's main rival was Fatah, which was the
Right.
original Palestinian group that Muhammad Abbas is in charge of, and that's the Yasser Arafat's folks. Um, and in 2006, they won 74 of 135, I think it is, seats in the Palestinian legislature or assembly, I think they call it. And the thing is, though, that in 2007, Hamas itself, they violently overthrew the remnants of the Palestinian Authority and took over Gaza. Thus, they have kind of broken, and there hasn't been another election, right?
Right.
So 2006 they were popular. Now so to say they're popularly elected, well, Hitler was popularly elected too, but he stayed past his chancellery, right? um, and The other thing, though, is that they are not Israelis, and that has always been. That's why it's the occupied area, right? Israel took over mainly the West Bank was the real landscape that the real territory that Israel took over, um, and uh, they have never annexed those territories. They have occupied them from an international legal point of view. It is illegal, but international law is what Um, and so you don't have, these people don't have the right. By these people, I mean the Palestinians living in the occupied areas do not have the right to vote in Israel. There are, by the way, many, many Arab Israelis. The
Mhm.
Muslim Brotherhood, I think, has 2 seats in the Knesset, right? Because there are people in parties that are represented there, but they are a small number, right? And that Israel never wanted to have that many non Israel or Palestinians voting in its elections, and so that's been the rock and the hard place they've been caught since they took over the occupied area. Um, and So there's that, right? And so I think the really interesting thing is to watch how Mahmoud Abbas uh, plays. He's watching Hamas destroy itself, and that's probably good for Fatah, but he doesn't want to crow about it, right? And so we're seeing that the West Bank folks kind of looking over there like, okay, what's going on, and how are we gonna come out of this? But with regard to uh, U.S. policy, I think we're siding with Israel. We were going to do that. You can't not do that if you're America. And I think we're focusing on keeping Iran out of the mix, and that's what the aircraft carriers are for, that sort of thing. So uh, I don't know that I have any criticism of American policy unless it's if you think the U.S. is going to restrain Israel, I'm sure they're privately telling them to chill out. Hey, our intelligence is you're going to get your asses kicked if you go here. Probably that is being communicated privately while they circle the wagons and say, yeah, Iran, you're not messing with this. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We're going to be on the side of people who kill a lot of people, but against people who killed a lot of other people. So,
Mm.
as far as Ukraine goes, that point about the weapons, right? We've given them weapons that if they weren't obsolete, they were certainly not things we need against China. There are a few like air defense missiles. There's some critical shortages that are there. I won't ignore
Yeah.
that. But I got to tell you, the cluster thing, we never talked about it. The cluster munitions we gave, that was the brilliant thing because those weapons are nearing their end of their shelf life. We were going to have to start taking them out and
Right.
dismantling them. I don't know how we were going to do that. It was going to be a very difficult process and costly. And we had crap tons of them in warehouses in Europe. And giving them to Ukraine was, it solved their ammo shortage, right? It solved a critical problem. And we were, giving those weapons there. And that I think has been a big part of the change here. And so the number that's often used is we've spent 5% of our defense budget to have, reduce, to make the second largest military in the world. Well, not the second largest military in the world. And I think that's cost effective in an insane way. Not to mention defending democracy and opposing aggression, because that would be the right thing to do. But oh, by the way, there is that.
There is that.
I always love the way you put things, especially when you wrap it up and put your little bow on there. And you can see in Dave's smile, he won't admit it, but he loves when he does the dismount and he sticks the landing. He loves.
Yay, that's what's up. That's what's up.
I'm a professor who teaches online. I was meant to be in front of a classroom, and I'm not. So
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your pain and
I'm getting
you
old.
having to take. You have such a hard life, taking your trips to beautiful Maine and going out on the boat and enjoying peace and tranquility. It's such a terrible time for
Hey,
you.
And art,
yeah.
so much art.
The struggle is real. I hear you.
The struggle is real.
Yeah.
Hey, Uncle Harold, why did you take me out on your boat when we were kids? Oh, yeah, that's right. We didn't have any
Hey,
money.
yeah, exactly. We didn't have a boat either. We've been on an inner
We lived
tube
in
or
Miami.
we'd have been on an inner tube or something. I don't know.
Hey, Dave, you know what? I didn't
It's
even
not a
know.
Miami boat. Let's keep this in mind. This is like, a motorboat with a tiller at the back.
No, it's funny because I didn't know that families went on vacations like in the summer and stuff when I was a kid until I was like, 14 years old. My idea of the summer was us collecting enough trash bags full of soda cans so we could get into the Six Flags for free. that, was,
Hey,
that was summer for me. But great show today, guys. Again, love educating the masses on these things because when we try to do different than when you're watching. I'm not going to say any particular news station, but sometimes when you're watching certain platforms, you're only going to get the opinions that they want to push out based on that platform. So I like that you two will educate people and give thoughtful opinions and with a lot of factual things to back up your opinion. So I always appreciate you here on the conversation with Harold and Dave. Sorry, I almost just choked on my own oxygen, but we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you, guys.
peace.
Peace out.